Hey friends, it's been a while since I recorded one of these videos, and that's because I've been busy with a number of other things, but I wanted to jump back onto this series that I started a couple of months ago, where I'm giving you a demonstration and an insight into how I compose and produce an ambient track. Now, the one that we're looking at is one that's going to be on my upcoming album, which incidentally is nearly finished. So in the time since I last recorded one of these demonstration videos, I've been working on finishing up that 10-track album. This is one of the remaining jigsaw pieces left. Everything else is more or less done and mixed. This is one of the last pieces. So in this video, I'm going to go through my process of mixing a track. If you've watched the previous episodes, you would have seen my process of recording the various instruments, constructing it, putting in the different layers, and now we've reached the stage where it's ready just to fine-tune. I tend to mix as I go along, as I'm recording, and I'll get the rough levels and the rough structure, but this is the final phase. It's just polishing off before the mastering and before the track is finally finished. And I have a bit of a process that I go through, and that usually starts by just listening through to the track start to finish, just to get an overall feel of how it sounds, any adjustments that I might want to make. Now, it's actually been, I think, a couple of months now since I even listened to this track, and so I'm coming to it with fresh ears, which is a really good place to start, because often in the process of actually composing, recording, you can lose sight of the bigger picture of what everything sounds like together. And so having a break from it doesn't have to be 2 months necessarily, just sometimes an hour or two is sufficient. Just allows you to come at it from a different perspective and listen to it kind of like it was the first time. So let's dive into the Logic screen and we'll play it through. As I play it through, I'm going to use a pen and a notepad and just make some notes of things that stand out that I want to change initially as a starting point. So I'll try and mention as we go along and do a bit of a commentary. First guitar swell's a bit loud. Could fade out a bit more quickly, I think, there. The little piano there sounds just a little bit rushed, so I might go back and adjust that as well. Okay, into the second section. We could have more of a swell into that as well. Strings just sound a bit static. I mean, it is just one chord held through, but I think it could do with some movement or interest there. Okay, final section. that's still going, so I need to tidy up the end as well. Okay, so what I'll do is go back to the beginning and just adjust some of those things that I noticed. Firstly, the guitar swells, I think, just a little bit loud, so I'm just going to use some manual automation just to drop that volume down a bit so it's less abrupt as those swells come in. That's better. That's a bit better, just eases in a bit more gently. Next thing, I think at the end of this first phrase, I just wanted that to just fade out a bit more quickly. So for the end of that last chord, let's replicate that down here. So let's fade out this guitar pad just to there. I'll do the same with this piano pad. It's only a subtle change. Let's see if that makes a perceptible difference. Touch more. Do the same on this guitar pad. I missed that one. Yep, that's a bit better. Subtle but important difference there. Okay. And then I put down at 0109, the piano sounds a bit rushed. Yeah, that bit. This little phrase here. Nope, don't want to do that. So here in this second phrase, it just feels like it jumps into it a bit too quickly. Let's just move that along a bit. Let's see how that sounds. Even a bit more than that, I think. Yeah, that's better. Just sits a bit more comfortably. Right, that's that change done. What are we up to? Now I've put swell into part 2, but I think that actually sounds okay. I think rather than increase the swell into part 2, I'm going to do the same as I did after that first phrase and just do a bit of an automated fade out, but not completely. And that will just accentuate when it does come back in, because I don't actually want to increase the volume of that second part. I want it to be quite soft, but if we bring all this down a bit, that drops out anyway. Yeah, I think that does quite nicely. Sometimes less is more. It can be tempting just to push volumes up and up and up, where in fact sometimes it's more effective to actually reduce the volume in surrounding sections to add that dynamic change, so it drops and then it comes back up, rather than constantly climbing that hill to the summit of ear-splitting loudness, particularly in ambient. I think that does the job there. Good. Okay. What are we up to? It's the string movement. Yeah, so this section of strings here, if I just solo that. It does have a bit of movement. There's a bit of oscillation there, but I think perhaps it's still a bit static. So I'm going to add just a subtle bit of side-to-side movement, a bit of where are we? A bit of tremolo, which can be quite severe, but if you dial it back, keep the smoothing up to 100%, so it's not all blocky like that. It just undulates slightly. So it will just slightly oscillate side to side. We've got like a volume oscillation. This will just oscillate left to right slightly. Let's go a little bit more depth. See how that sounds in context. While we're there, we've got these guitar pads. So this one only comes in the second half. And that one goes all the way through. And then this one comes back in. I'm just going to pan that one slightly right and this one slightly left. And then with this one, I'm going to add a pan man. It achieves a similar kind of effect to the tremolo. It just moves the signal left and right slightly, and I've got my own preset here, Raphah pan slow. And you can see this sort of LED indicator shows you how fast and slow and how wide it's moving that track in the stereo field. And again, it's just a subtle thing to give it that movement. Particularly with ambient, when you have pads and lots of kind of droney one-note type elements to your track, it can sound very one-dimensional. And so if you have lots of those, I find by adding in this lateral movement, as I like to call it, adding in some modulation and some panning, it just creates more of a soundscape. It's less one-dimensional, it's more multi-dimensional, and adds that interest to the ears. Even though that's unperceptible to most people, it gives it a bit of extra colour and texture. Let's see what that sounds like in context. I'm going to do exactly the same thing here as I've done in the other sections, and just do a little volume drop with the automation. again, just to differentiate between the different sections, allow the end of that section to breathe before the next one comes in. Guitars can stay there. Let's go a bit further back actually, and you'll notice I'm not being particularly precise about where I put these fade points, because I deliberately don't want them to be all in exactly the same place. I want each track to slightly overlap the other. If they all faded at exactly the same time, that would be a bit boring. Let's try that. Guitar as well. And there wasn't anything in this final section that really jumped out. I really like how this is sounding. It fades out quite naturally there. Okay, so those are all the initial adjustments that I want to make. Just because I like things in order, I'm just going to move a few bits around. So I'm going to put these atmospheric sounds at the top, guitars all together, piano together, bass always put at the bottom for hopefully fairly obvious reasons. Strings will go there. What I like to do next is, particularly on guitars or any real instruments I've used, is just to roll off on EQ some of the bass. But what I'm going to do initially, we've got the lead guitar here and we've got the guitar swell, so I'm going to put those together, and then we've got these sort of little artifact sounds, and then we've got 3 pads, so I'm going to group those together. Let's call those guitar pads, and that just makes it easier to manage everything. So rather than EQ each individual guitar pad, I'm just going to EQ the group, and all I'm going to do is roll off the very low frequencies, because there isn't actually anything there. But particularly with real instruments, guitars, sometimes you can get some hum, some electrical hum, some low frequency noises or bumps or things that make a bit of a rumble, and when combined with multiple tracks can create a bit of a muddy mess in the mix. So I always just roll those back a little bit, put quite steep cut off on those. And again, not a perceptible change, not something you probably hear unless you're really intently listening out for it, but it just cleans up the whole mix. I'm going to do the same on the guitar swells and the lead as well. Okay, so that's that done. Okay, while I'm doing EQ, come back to these guitar pads, because to my ears this still sounds a little bit muddy, so I'm just going to play with this high frequency shelf. I'll go to the extreme, you'll see it gives it loads of high-end air. I just want to give it a bit of a boost from about 1K. I think the piano's getting a bit lost, perhaps because of this guitar pad, so I'm just doing a bit of a sweep. I think we'll just dip this down a bit, so at the lower mid frequencies, we'll just make some space for that piano. There's no hard and fast rules with EQ. I've watched so many videos of people saying you should never cut by more than 4 dB, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't do that. I just go by ear and just try and boost things I think need to be boosted, and carve things out where I think there needs to be a bit of space. So I'm going to leave that about there. Again, it's a subtle change, it's nothing major. I really like the tone of that guitar, but perhaps just a bit of a shelf boost up here. I don't want to boost those mids too much, because that's where a lot of that nice luscious tone is coming from. Just give it a bit of extra air and lift in the top. Just to give it a bit of boost in those lower mid ranges, brings out that nice tone. Okay, I think that will do. So that's the atmosphere again. You can very faintly hear that in the background. I'm wondering whether I might actually just boost that slightly. so you can just about hear it over the overall mix. There's a bit of a strange sound there. Where's that coming from? It's quite a high-pitched sound. There's a bit of extraneous guitar part there. I think that's it, so I'm going to cut that off. Let's clean that up. See if that fixes it. I'm not sure that was it, but I can't actually find it now, so I might have to deep dive later and figure out where that sound is coming from. Although it's not horrendous, it is in tune, it's not entirely terrible. Might just leave it there. Okay, what else have we got then? Overall, this mix is actually quite balanced. There's not much I'm really wanting to do. Sometimes I'll spend a lot more time balancing, panning, changing volumes, automating, compressing. There's nothing even I think that I want to compress particularly, although on those pads I might just throw on any compressor as well, just to glue things together. Nope, wrong one. So guitar pads. Let's try the platinum, I quite like that one as well. Put a compressor on this just to even out the sound, bring up the quiet bits and squash the louder bits. Sounding okay. Okay, that's about as much as EQ and compression as I want to do, and there isn't really an awful lot left. We've panned the Atmos, so that sort of texture sound. With the pads, we've got two of those pads panned slightly left and right to give it some stereo width. we want the bass down the middle. Strings, what I sometimes do is double the track and then pan them left and right, but I'm not going to do that on this one because I think they sound fine as they are. There's enough space in the mix. Sometimes it gets a bit crowded in that sort of mid-frequency area, but I think this sounds suitably spacious, so I'm not actually too worried about doing that. And I don't want it to be too epic. Sometimes you add too many string layers or pan it too far and it becomes a really string heavy kind of orchestral cinematic soundscape rather than something a bit more intimate. So I think I'm going to leave that where it is. Let's just listen to that to double check. That is what I want to do. Building in a bit more and slightly louder in that midsection. One thing I forgot to do, so I've had to hit record again, is do the ending, which is very important. And indeed, the beginning, let's have a look at that. I think that's okay. We'll go back and listen to that in a moment. So we've got a couple of fade outs. Let's just put one here as well. There's nothing worse than a track that just falls off a cliff at the end and sounds ragged and unfinished. So I've got some staggered fade outs. I've now fixed that one, so let's see how that sounds. Nice. Gentle fade out. I always fade out the tracks even if there's no actual waveforms up to the end. Sometimes you can get a tail from the reverb or different effects which carry on beyond, and so if you cut the track there but the tail's still going, it just sounds very abrupt. So I always fade out a track even if there's nothing playing at the time. I'll do the same on this piano. Now there may well be a quicker way of doing that. I'm sure someone will, if they are watching and know better than I do, be able to say, oh, there's an easy way of just fading all the tracks at the same time. Perhaps there is, but that's just the way I do it until I find a shorter cut. So that's the beginning. Sorry, that's the end. Let's go back to the beginning. And again, there's nothing worse than a track that just jumps straight into it. Different for other genres, but especially for ambient. So again, even if it's a really steep fade, just to cut off any weirdness at the beginning, I always put fade on the beginning. Yeah, that's fine. Good. That's the beginning and the end finished. Okay, now this is the point at which you could tweak and fiddle and adjust to your heart's content and never actually get to the point where it's done. But you've got to just draw the line somewhere. And what I'll probably do is leave this now, let it sit for an hour, I'll go and do something else, and I'll come back and listen to it again just to make sure, again with those fresh ears, that it's sounding balanced and full and like a proper mix. There's nothing that stands out too much or is getting in the way of something else. But I'm happy with that. This was actually quite an easy one. As this whole track has been, I could have written something and recorded these YouTube videos and spent hours tearing my hair out if I had any to try and get it just right, but by some miracle this YouTube video series has gone very, very smoothly. Perhaps it's the pressure of having a camera in front of me. Perhaps I should do it a bit more to come up with things that sound great and work really well. It's not always this straightforward. I will just put that caveat in there. But that's pretty much the last puzzle piece for this album. I am going to listen through the entire 10 tracks at some point, maybe later in the week, just to make sure that the mixes are okay. And then I'll probably send them off to a friend who will hopefully kindly listen to them for me from a fresh perspective and give me some feedback on some additional things perhaps to change. But that's that. So as the track finishes, thank you for joining me. If you haven't seen the previous parts of this series, do go back and see them. I hope it's been interesting for you, a bit of an insight into how I'm creating. I'm not always able to articulate exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing and what I'm listening for. Perhaps if I do more videos that will improve. But nevertheless, I really enjoy seeing other people's processes, so hopefully you do, and that's been a useful video for you and something enjoyable. That's it for now, and I hope to see you again soon. Do check out my other YouTube videos where I'm doing vlogs, and I'm also doing improvised ambient sessions. Till then, take care.